right. Well, if you've had research methods, things like that, a lot of this is going to look very familiar to you. And so feel free to put me on double speed or something until the slide implies I'm talking about something you don't already know. So what is science? Well, it's a process, right? That's the important thing. It's a process. It's a method for generating a body of knowledge. It doesn't matter what you're studying. It's how you do it that determines whether the activity you're engaged in is science or not. So in science, we follow the logic of inquiry, which means that we want to understand concepts, processes, relationships, right? Like that's the goal of science. We're trying to figure out what is this thing? What is this concept? How does that work? What's this process? What is the relationship between this characteristic and that characteristic? Like that's what we do. We use the logic of inquiry to approach that problem. So is psychology a science? Yes, of course it is. And we know that that's true because it relies on formal, systematic observation that answers questions about behavior, right? Like that, the process is what matters. So obviously psychology is a science. Hopefully you weren't harboring any thoughts that it wasn't before you started this class. Now the goals of science are description, explanation, prediction, and control. And these line up really nicely with the different ways that we can collect data and describe data. So let's start with description. Description is providing an accurate portrayal or depiction of a phenomenon. All right, so when we are first starting in a topic, we may get started by just describing the concept. So maybe we just noticed, because we are brand new, or maybe it's 1875 or something, we just noticed that some people seem to feel better about themselves than other people do. And so we say some people seem to hold themselves in higher esteem than other people do. We haven't coined the term self-esteem yet, so we'll just say some people seem to hold themselves in higher esteem than others do. And then now we're going to describe really thoroughly what it looks like to hold yourself in higher esteem and what it looks like not to, right? Like we're going to have a very thorough, accurate, maybe kind of too pedantic description of exactly what we mean to say that this might be something that people differ on. Okay, now at the explanation level, we're going to gather knowledge about why a phenomenon exists or what causes it. In most research, we would say we are gathering data about why a phenomenon exists or what causes it. So now that we've accurately and thoroughly described this new thing about esteem a person might hold for themselves, in the explanation phase, we are going to try and figure out, okay, well, why is it that people vary on that? Maybe we'll coin the term. Why do people vary on self-esteem? What factors go into that? And so we may collect data that helps us to explain, at least from our perspective of what's going on, right? So we might say, well, it seems like people who are really successful seem to feel better about themselves. So maybe success is a factor that triggers higher self-esteem. And so we'll gather information to find out if more successful people do in fact feel better about themselves than less successful people, something like that. All we're doing in this is attempting to explain why the phenomenon exists or maybe what causes it. It's the next level of prediction where we're going to try to anticipate an event prior to its occurrence. So in the prediction level, we might say, I predict that a person who wins a race will express higher self-esteem than a person who has lost a race. So we watch a race and then we interview the winner and we interview all the losers and we look to see whether the race, did we accurately predict it, that the winner feels good and the losers feel bad about themselves. I'm sorry about my dumb example, but at least I'm keeping with it. I am sticking with this dumb example. All right, so we make that prediction. I think that winning a race will boost your self-esteem, and then I measure it and of course I describe and explain it. The last level is the control level, and this is not necessarily achievable in all topics. But in the control level, we're going to manipulate conditions and see if they affect behavior. So I'm going to randomly assign someone to win a race and randomly assign someone else to lose a race. Of course, we're psychologists, so we all know how that would happen. I would have Confederates who are in the race, and in the one race, the Confederates are told, hold back, let that person win. But don't act like you're holding back. Look like you're trying really hard, and you don't want them to think that you threw the race. And then in the other one, you've got a ringer who is like the fastest person in the state, and you make them, win the race. And so you have manipulated the field so that one person is guaranteed to win and the other person is guaranteed to lose. And you look to see whether the one who won feels better about themselves than the one who lost. And so you've controlled things. You've made them a winner or made them a loser. Did that cause them to have a different degree of self-esteem? I had to stick with a dumb example because I don't think that could be done, honestly. I guess it could be. A good social psychologist would throw in some Confederates and wouldn't feel bad about it. But the idea that you can randomly assign one person to win and one person to lose is the critical factor here in control. And in a lot of things in psychology in general and in IO psychology in particular, we don't have control over the variables. Like we can't assign you to be one sex or the other. We can't assign you to be a full-time employee or a part-time employee. We can't randomly assign you to a lot of things that we're interested in. And so a lot of our research is going to be prediction level or less, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just one of the reasons why a lot of fields look at psychology as just a social science that doesn't have the kind of control that another kind of science might have, because we don't have control to the level that some sciences have. So those are our major goals. Now, what are the three assumptions of science? Well, one is empiricism. That is the idea that our predictions should come from a theory. Which, okay, we already violate that in psychology a lot of the times because we don't have good coherent theories about a lot of things. But let's go on. Let's pretend like we have a theory. Our predictions are coming from a theory. We gather data. Okay, we do that. And we use the data to test our predictions. Okay, we do that part. So the reason why we don't have a lot of well-developed theories is just because our science is quite young. And so over time, we're getting more and more theories. Just in the time that I've been in the field, which actually is a pretty long time, but I mean, in the scope of life, in the scope of the universe, I haven't been in here that long. But I've been noticing that there are theories that have emerged on topics that back when I was a student, they didn't have theories on that yet. And so we're getting better. We're getting better at having theories to drive our predictions. The next assumption I wanted to address is determinism. Behavior is orderly and systematic. Now, you might have learned the word determinism in maybe a philosophy class, and maybe it was talked about as far as like whether you have free will. We're not talking about necessarily free will here. What we're talking about as far as determinism is that every behavior has a cause. Every behavior was determined by something. It could be your level of hunger determined whether you sought out something to eat, right? It could be that you're a puppet and there's some puppet master that we can't see but is in control of your outcomes. It could be anything in between those. All we care about with regard to science is that every behavior has a cause. If it doesn't, then the whole attempt to explain and predict doesn't even make sense, does it? If there's not a cause, if things just randomly happen, then there's no point in attempting to explain or predict an outcome. And so we have to believe that every behavior has, an orderly, systematic cause, and that cause can be discovered. So discoverability is our third assumption. Behavior can be experienced, examined, and discovered. That we can look out into the world and we can see a behavior and then ultimately discover its cause, or at least try to. It's some things that we've been trying to find the cause of. We've been struggling with it for decades. But I mean, the assumption that there must be a cause is what keeps us going. So discoverability. All right. So I mentioned we don't have a lot of coherent theories in psychology. So what is a theory? It's a systematic view which explains and predicts a phenomenon. So it's got these two levels, right? The first thing that it says there is it explains a phenomenon. The A good theory explains the data that has already been collected, right? So in a new field, you're doing a bunch of descriptive stuff, a little explanation stuff, and you're starting to build up some data, and you're starting to get maybe some patterns that are emerging. A theory may start to evolve to account for those patterns, for those consistencies. And so the biggest job of a theory is to explain things. And then the next level is that we use that explanation to then make predictions about what's likely to happen in the future. What kind of data we'll collect next? What's still out there to observe. So what feeds into a theory, first off, a construct it's another word for concept, but a construct is something that is not directly observable. Self-esteem, from my earlier example, would be an example of a construct. You all vaguely know what self-esteem is, but it's not something that we can directly observe. We'd have to figure out some way to measure that. So a lot of times theories rely really heavily on constructs, things that aren't super precise and aren't directly observable. And that is what makes psychology in particular problematic with regard to our theories, is that we don't all agree on the definition of a construct. What I mean by self-esteem might not be a perfect match to what you mean by self-esteem. And in fact, within the world of researchers on self-esteem, some people will argue self-esteem is a general trait that you either have high self-esteem or you don't have high self-esteem. Other people will say, no, it's much more situational and dependent on, like, maybe you have high self-esteem as a student and then low self-esteem as a romantic partner or something like that. Because not everybody agrees on the definition of the construct, we get into a lot of trouble. We get into a lot of arguments, for one thing, but we get into a lot of trouble because we aren't all measuring the same thing, and we might talk about it as if we are, which brings up the issue of definitions. So we need definitions of our constructs. You might have learned the term operational definitions. When doing research, we may say, for the purposes of this study, what I mean by self-esteem is a score on the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. There's my operational definition. This is all I mean by it. Don't infer anymore. So we might operationally define our constructs. We might try to give a more comprehensive definition of the construct so that the reader understands what we mean by it in our report or whatever. But definitions are definitely part of any theory. We're trying to explain what we mean. And then propositions are predictions. I propose that if I were to cause you to lose, you would express lower self-esteem after the loss than you did before the loss. Ooh, look at me. I did a within subjects design on that one. So I make a prediction, and it's something that I've made it point at the theory because theories lead to propositions, but you know what? The results of my proposition will feed into the theory too. So I wanted to make sure that it was clear that yes, theories allow us to predict a phenomenon, but those predictions also help to inform the theory going forward. If our prediction is not supported, we may need to go back and revisit the theory. If our prediction is supported, then we can, tick that away and say, well, the theory is still in the running. It seems to be accurately predicting things. Constructs, definitions and propositions, all of these things interact with each other and help to funnel in to become what is called a theory. All right, so what makes a good theory? First off, it should be parsimonious. I, on purpose, listed this first. It should be able to explain a lot, but it should be as simple as possible. I'll pick on poor Sigmund Freud for a second because one of the biggest problems with his theories is that they are not parsimonious. He invokes all sorts of details and unmeasurable things in order to explain his concepts. He has to invoke an unconscious. He has to invoke 3 different components of your unconscious, some of which, like the ego and the superego, are slightly available to your conscious awareness, and then the other parts of those two things are under the waterline, so they're unconscious, and then but they can talk to the id that's completely unconscious. I mean, it's pretty complicated, and that was just one aspect of Freudian theory. That he does not have a very parsimonious theory. A much more useful theory would be something that is able to take as few moving parts as possible to explain the concept. So something simple like losing anything might be a hit to a person's self-esteem. That might reduce, maybe temporarily, a person's self-esteem. That's a much more parsimonious theory. That's much more, that helps to explain like all the data, like people who have had a setback tend to show lower self-esteem. That's a pretty parsimonious theory. I didn't invoke anything that can't be directly observed. I didn't invoke anything that takes like 3 intervening steps. You want to keep it simple. You want to keep it precise. You want to be specific and accurate in your wording in a theory. Sometimes, unfortunately, that means that theorists write really long papers defining and redefining concepts in ways that you're like, I think I already got this, but now you gave another example and now I'm lost again. So sometimes theoretical papers are not very precise, but they should be. You want to have good, accurate wording and be as specific as possible in a theory. A theory should be testable. You know, they make those propositions, they make those predictions, and so we should be able to test them. We should be able to set up some kind of study that would allow us to figure out whether those predictions are accurate or not. Not all theories are testable. I'm going to pick on poor Freud again because some of the things that he says in his theories are not testable. How would we ever know if some kind of battle is going on in your unconscious? How would we ever know that? So just not testable. That's not a good theory. The theory should be useful. Right? Is it practical? Is it helpful in describing, explaining, and predicting important phenomena? Now, does it have to be useful to the everyday person in life? Probably not. A lot of science is basic research that doesn't help the everyday person. But does it help a field to move forward? Does it help members of a field to understand something more thoroughly? Yeah, now that's a useful theory. So it doesn't have to be useful to the everyday person, unfortunately. And then generative. This is really important not only to the researcher themselves, to the theorists themselves, because as they generate a theory, that's probably going to spawn a bunch of research for themselves in their own lab. It's going to go crazy collecting data. But also people who read their theory, they're going to be inspired and they're going to do additional research as a result. And that helps the field to flourish. And so good theories have these qualities. Not all, maybe to the same extent. Some theories are less precise, some are less useful. But you know what? If they're parsimonious, testable, and generative, I'd say that's, you're still probably on the way to a pretty good theory. Okay. Let's go ahead and stop here and let's talk about the research process in the next video.